When my son, Daniel, told me he was finally getting married, I smiled, though part of me trembled inside. He had been my only child, the quiet one, the one who never liked to talk about his life too much. When he brought home the news of his engagement, I was happy, of course, but there was something in the way he said it, almost like he was asking for my permission instead of sharing his joy. I asked to meet her family, naturally. He hesitated. That hesitation said more than words could. A week later, I received an invitation, not from Daniel, but from his fiancée, Rebecca. It was handwritten on thick paper, gold lettering, polished edges. It read, "Dinner with the family, Friday, 7 p.m." No mention of me as mom or mother of the groom. Just Mrs. Walker. I stared at that invitation for a long while, tracing my fingers over the edges. Maybe it meant nothing. Or maybe it meant everything. When Friday came, I stood in front of the mirror wondering what to wear. My best dress was old but clean. I had bought it 20 years ago, the same year my husband passed away. I could have worn something finer, I could afford it, but that night, I wanted something else. I wanted to see how they would treat me if they thought I had nothing. So I chose a faded floral dress, simple shoes, and tied my hair into a bun. When I looked at myself, I saw not the woman who had run a successful business for years, but a woman who the world would easily underestimate. At 7 sharp, I walked up the steps to their house. It was grand, the kind of place that looks like it doesn't welcome dust or mistakes. The door opened, and there stood Rebecca. She was beautiful, poised, every detail perfect, from her diamond earrings to her carefully painted nails. But when her eyes met my dress, her smile faltered for just a second. "Mrs. Walker," she said, voice sweet but distant. "Please, come in." Inside, the air smelled of candles and roasted lamb. A large dining table gleamed under a crystal chandelier. Everyone was already seated, her parents, her younger brother, and Daniel, looking uncomfortably formal in a suit that didn't fit him quite right. I greeted everyone warmly. Her father nodded politely but didn't rise. Her mother offered a small smile that didn't reach her eyes. Daniel stood and pulled out a chair for me beside him, whispering softly, "You didn't have to dress up, Mom." I smiled back. "This is my best, sweetheart." As dinner began, the conversation floated between them like I wasn't there. They spoke of business, travel, expensive things. When they did address me, it was with small, careful questions. "Do you still work? Where do you live now?" Their tone was polite, but their eyes told the truth. They thought I was beneath them. I answered simply. "I do some cleaning here and there. Keeps me busy." Rebecca's mother nodded slowly, clearly satisfied with the picture she had drawn of me, the humble widow, probably burdened by bills and small dreams. Daniel glanced at me, uncertain. He didn't know why I was playing along. But I wanted to see it through. As the meal went on, Rebecca's father began sharing stories about his investments, casually mentioning numbers that made the room hold its breath. At one point, he turned to Daniel and said, "I hope you've thought about your future. Stability matters when you start a family. Not everyone comes from established backgrounds." Rebecca laughed softly, touching her father's arm as if to say, "Don't embarrass him." But she didn't stop him. I sipped my water, listening, quiet as ever. When dessert arrived, a perfect chocolate mousse, I thanked them kindly. "That was delicious," I said. Her mother smiled faintly. "It's from a local pâtisserie. We don't usually cook." "I see," I said. "In my house, we always did things by hand." Food tastes better when you make it yourself. The table went silent for a second. Then her brother chuckled under his breath. Maybe, but not everyone has the time. I met his gaze calmly. Sometimes, it's not about time. It's about care. Daniel looked between us, nervous. But I wasn't angry. If anything, I was learning. That night, I saw clearly how my son's new world saw me, not as family, but as a guest to be tolerated. Still, I smiled. Because the thing about people who judge too quickly is that they always reveal more about themselves than they realize. When I got home, I took off the dress and folded it neatly on the bed. I thought about what had happened, the whispers, the glances, the quiet superiority. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel hurt. I felt curious. If they saw me as poor and naive, maybe it was time to let that illusion teach them something they'd never forget. The next morning, I sat by my kitchen window, watching the sunlight break through the thin curtains. My tea had gone cold. I hadn't touched it for a while. All I could think about was that dinner, the way their eyes had moved over me, how their smiles had tightened when I spoke. It wasn't anger that filled me. It was something quieter. Something sharper. I wanted them to understand what they had done, not just to me, but to themselves. People like that, the ones who look at others and see only what they wear, never learn unless life teaches them. And sometimes, life needs a little help. I picked up my phone and dialed Daniel. He sounded tired. Mom, about last night. I'm sorry if they made you feel. Don't apologize for them, I said softly. You didn't do anything wrong. There was a pause. I know, but I should have said something. They had no right to treat you that way. I smiled, though he couldn't see it. You'll get your chance to stand up for what's right, Daniel. We all do. Before hanging up, I asked him when he and Rebecca planned to host the engagement dinner. He said next week. I told him I'd be there. But this time, I wouldn't come as the poor mother they thought I was. I spent the next few days quietly preparing. Not with anger or vanity, but with purpose. The truth was, I hadn't lived a poor life. After my husband passed, I built a small company from scratch, a cleaning service that had grown into one of the largest in the city. For years, I worked hard, saved every cent, and eventually sold the business for more than I'd ever dreamed possible. But wealth had never changed me. I still lived simply, cooked my own meals, and wore old dresses that carried memories instead of labels. That's why, when I decided to reveal who I really was, I wanted it to mean something. It wasn't about pride. It was about teaching respect, the kind that doesn't depend on appearances. That week, I visited an old friend, Eleanor, who owned a small boutique. She had known me since Daniel was a boy. When she saw me walk in, she smiled. Well, if it isn't my favorite mystery woman. What brings you here, dear? I need your help, I said. Something elegant, but not loud. Something that says, I belong wherever I go. Eleanor's eyes sparkled. She disappeared into the back and returned with a long navy blue dress, simple but dignified. The fabric shimmered softly when it caught the light. She handed it to me and said, "This one doesn't shout. It speaks." When I tried it on, I felt like myself again, not the version people pitied, but the woman I had become through every struggle and quiet victory. The night of the engagement dinner arrived faster than I expected. This time, I didn't take the bus. I arrived in my car, the one I rarely used, a silver sedan that still looked new despite its age. When I stepped out in front of their house, the same grand doors opened again. Rebecca was there, dressed in an expensive gown, her lips painted a perfect shade of red. For a moment, she didn't recognize me. Her eyes traveled from my dress to my hair, now neatly styled, and then back to my face. Her voice caught slightly. "Mrs. Walker, you look lovely." "Thank you, dear," I said calmly. "It's nice to see you again." Inside, the air felt different, or maybe it was me. The same chandelier sparkled overhead, the same table gleamed. But this time, they looked at me differently. Not with warmth, exactly, but with confusion. And that was enough. Rebecca's father stood this time. Mrs. Walker. Good to have you with us again." I smiled. "It's a pleasure." As we sat, Rebecca's mother complimented my dress. "It's beautiful," she said. "Where did you get it?" "Oh, just a small local boutique," I replied. "An old friend owns it. I've helped her keep it running for years." Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "You work in fashion?" I took a sip of water before answering. "Not exactly. I used to manage a company, actually, cleaning, of all things. It started small, but we grew. I retired a few years ago." Silence. It spread around the table like spilled wine. Her father cleared his throat. "You owned a company?" "Yes," I said softly. "Over 300 employees before I sold it. I suppose I've always believed in working hard, no matter how small you start." Daniel looked stunned. Rebecca froze, her fore covering midair. And her mother's polite smile faltered for the first time that night. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. I simply let the truth settle in the space between us. As the conversation resumed, their tone changed completely. Her father began asking about business, about leadership. Her mother complimented my humility, as she called it. Rebecca tried to join in, but her voice wavered. I watched quietly. It was strange, how quickly respect could appear when wealth was revealed. The same people who had dismissed me now leaned forward to hear every word. Near the end of dinner, Rebecca's mother said, "I must say, you carry yourself so gracefully, Mrs. Walker. We had no idea you'd accomplished so much." I smiled gently. That's the thing about life. You never really know who's sitting across from you, do you? The table went quiet again. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Even Daniel seemed unsure whether to breathe or laugh. Then Rebecca reached across the table and took my hand. Her grip was light, but her eyes looked uncertain. "Mrs. Walker. I owe you an apology," she said. "For what?" I asked. She hesitated. "For assuming things I shouldn't have. For judging too quickly." I nodded, not unkindly. "We all do it, dear. What matters is that we recognize it." After dinner, when everyone had gone to the patio for drinks, I stood alone in the dining room, staring at the empty plates. The evening had gone exactly as I expected, yet it didn't fill me with satisfaction. Instead, it filled me with something deeper, sadness for how fragile human kindness can be. They respected me now, but only because of what I had, not who I was. And that, perhaps, was the greatest lesson of all. The next morning, I woke up early. The engagement dinner had ended hours ago, but my mind was still wide awake. Every word, every glance from that night replayed in my head like echoes in an empty hall. For a moment, I almost wished I hadn't told them anything. Sometimes, the truth doesn't bring respect, it just exposes people's real intentions. Later that week, Rebecca called me. Her voice was unusually warm. "Mrs. Walker," she began, "my parents couldn't stop talking about you. They'd love to meet again, maybe discuss some business ideas. My father said he's always wanted to invest in local enterprises." I smiled faintly, even though she couldn't see it. I had seen that look in her father's eyes, the kind that doesn't see a person, only opportunity. Still, I agreed to visit. When I arrived at their house again, the welcome was different. Her mother rushed to greet me with open arms. "Please, come in. I made coffee myself this time," she said with a laugh that sounded rehearsed. Her father joined us in the living room, wearing an eager smile. He asked questions about my old company, about the cleaning industry, about profit margins. At first, I answered politely, keeping things light. But when he began suggesting partnership opportunities, I knew where this was going. He leaned forward, lowering his voice like we were sharing a secret. "You know, Mrs. Walker, with your experience in my capital, we could build something even bigger. Imagine how proud Daniel and Rebecca would be." His wife nodded quickly. "Yes, we believe in family ventures. It keeps everyone close." I sipped my coffee slowly, taking a moment before answering. "That's very kind," I said. "But I retired for a reason. My time now is meant for peace, not profit." The smiles on their faces flickered, just slightly. "Oh, of course," he said, leaning back. "I only meant, you shouldn't let opportunity go to waste." "I agree," I replied, "but sometimes, peace is the greatest opportunity of all." Her mother looked away, her expression tightening. It was clear they hadn't expected me to say no. As the conversation drifted to other topics, I noticed how Rebecca sat quietly, hands folded on her lap. Her eyes darted between her parents and me, as if she was caught between pride and discomfort. When I left that afternoon, she walked me to the car. "Mrs. Walker," she said softly, "I think they're just trying to impress you." "I know," I said. "But it's better to be impressed by kindness than by money." She smiled awkwardly. "You're right. I'll talk to them." But I could tell from her tone that she wouldn't. She was raised in a world where appearance mattered more than sincerity. That evening, Daniel called. He sounded tense. "Mom, Rebecca told me about her parents' offer." "You said no?" "I did." "Why?" "It could have been good for everyone." I hesitated, not because I didn't have an answer, but because I didn't want to disappoint him. "Daniel," I said gently, "sometimes people don't offer help because they care. They do it because they want control." He sighed. "You always think people have hidden motives." "No," I said quietly. "I just pay attention when they reveal them." For a while, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "They're hosting another family gathering next weekend. Rebecca really wants you there." "I'll be there," I said, though part of me knew it wouldn't be a celebration. It would be a test. Days passed. And as I prepared to see them again, I realized something strange. I wasn't nervous this time. I felt steady, calm, like a woman walking toward something she already understood. When I arrived that weekend, the house was louder than before. Guests filled the living room, business associates, friends, people who smiled too widely. Rebecca greeted me warmly, perhaps too warmly. "Mrs. Walker. Come, sit near the front. My father has been telling everyone about you." I smiled and followed her. Her father stood near the fireplace, talking about family values and legacy. Then, as if on cue, he turned to me. "And here's a woman who built something from nothing," he said proudly. She's proof that with hard work, anyone can succeed. Isn't that right, Mrs. Walker? Dozens of eyes turned toward me. Some curious. Some calculating. I rose slowly. Well, I said, I didn't build it alone. I built it with people who believe that respect isn't earned through money, but through how you treat those who have less than you. A quiet ripple passed through the room. Her father chuckled nervously. Of course, of course. Respect is important. But his tone said otherwise. It was the same tone people use when they agree with something they don't understand. After the guests left that evening, Rebecca found me in the hallway. Her eyes looked red, like she'd been crying. Mrs. Walker, she whispered, my father's upset. He said you embarrassed him. I turned to her calmly. I didn't embarrass him. I reminded him of something he forgot. She shook her head, frustrated. You don't understand how he is. He cares about his reputation. And I care about his daughter, I said softly. That's why I won't let you build your life on the kind of respect that disappears when the money does. Rebecca looked away. You think I'm like them? I think you're learning from them, I said. But you can still unlearn it. That night, when I returned home, the house felt colder than usual. I sat at the table, staring at the same folded invitation from weeks ago. It reminded me of the first time I walked into their house, wearing that faded floral dress. It was strange how life circles back, teaching lessons you didn't know you still needed. I had gone there to test them, but perhaps they were testing me too. Because the more I tried to show them who I was, the more I realized something painful. I wasn't just disappointed in them. I was disappointed in how easily I had expected them to change. Change doesn't come from revelation. It comes from humility, and that's something you can't force into someone else's heart. Still, I decided I wasn't done yet. One more meeting. One more dinner. One final chance for them to understand that wealth means nothing without grace. And this time, I wouldn't need fine dresses or fancy stories. I'd only need the truth, simple and unpolished, the kind they had looked down upon the first night we met. The following week, I made a decision. If they couldn't see beyond their pride in someone else's home, maybe they needed to step into mine. So, I picked up the phone and called Rebecca. Would you and your parents join me for dinner this Sunday? I asked. There was a pause. Her tone was polite but hesitant. Of course, Mrs. Walker. We'd be delighted. I could almost hear the uncertainty in her voice, the kind that comes when people don't know what to expect. For the next few days, I prepared quietly. I didn't hire caterers. I didn't decorate. I simply cleaned my little house the way I always did, every corner scrubbed with care. It wasn't grand, but it was honest, a home built by hands that never stopped working. When Sunday came, I set the table with my favorite dishes, the ones I'd saved for years, porcelain plates with tiny cracks at the edges. To anyone else, they might look worn, but to me, they carried the comfort of memory. At 7 sharp, I saw their car pull up outside. Rebecca stepped out first, looking nervous. Behind her came her parents, both dressed elegantly, as if attending a formal dinner instead of a humble meal. I greeted them warmly at the door. Welcome. Please, come in. They looked around as they entered, their eyes moving slowly across the living room, the old photographs, the wooden furniture polished until it shone. Her father smiled thinly. Cozy place you have here, Mrs. Walker. Thank you, I said. It's small, but every piece here has a story. Her mother's eyes landed on a framed picture on the wall. It was of my husband and me, years ago, standing in front of the small cleaning van we'd started our business with. She tilted her head slightly. You must miss him. Every day, I said. But he's still here, in everything I've built. The air softened a little. Even they could feel it, the weight of memory, of love that never fades. I led them to the table. Dinner was simple, roasted chicken, vegetables, and homemade bread. Not elegant, but warm and filling. As they took their seats, Rebecca whispered, "It smells wonderful." I smiled. That's the secret ingredient, care. For the first few minutes, conversation was polite. Then, slowly, it began to shift. Her father asked about the old photos on the wall. Her mother asked about my recipes. And somewhere between those questions, something changed, their voices grew softer, their smiles less guarded. When the main course was done, I brought out dessert, a pie made from the apples that grew in my backyard. Rebecca's mother took a bite and closed her eyes. This tastes like something my grandmother used to make. Then I've done my job, I said gently. Silence followed, not the awkward kind, but the kind that feels like understanding. After a while, her father cleared his throat. You've done well for yourself, Mrs. Walker. I admit, when we first met, I underestimated you. I looked at him and smiled softly. That's all right. People often mistake simplicity for weakness. He nodded slowly. Then he said something I didn't expect. My father was a farmer. We didn't have much. But he used to tell me that humility is a gift you either grow up with or spend your life trying to buy back. His voice cracked slightly at the end. For the first time since I'd known him, he didn't sound like a man of pride. He sounded human. Rebecca reached across the table and took my hand. Thank you for this dinner, she said. It's strange. I've been surrounded by comfort my whole life, but I've never felt this kind of peace. Her mother nodded quietly. You remind us of what we've forgotten, that a home isn't built by wealth, but by the warmth inside it. For a long moment, none of us spoke. The sound of the clock ticking filled the room. It was the kind of silence that doesn't need words to explain what everyone feels. When they finally left that night, Rebecca hugged me tightly at the door. I know we got off to a bad start, she said. But I want you to know, I see you now. I touched her cheek gently. Then that makes everything worth it. Her parents thanked me politely, and as they walked to their car, I saw her father glance back once, not out of suspicion this time, but out of respect. When their taillights disappeared down the street, I closed the door and leaned against it for a moment. The house was quiet again, but this time, the quiet felt full. I walked back to the table and looked at the empty plates, the half-finished pie, the candles burning low. I smiled to myself. It wasn't revenge I had wanted. It was understanding. And somehow, in that small dining room, with chipped plates and honest food, they had found it. But as I turned to blow out the candles, a thought crossed my mind, one that would stay with me long after that night was over. Respect earned by revelation fades. Respect born from connection lasts forever. The weeks leading up to the wedding passed quickly. Every day seemed filled with decisions of flowers, music, seating charts, the kind of things that mattered only until the day after the wedding. Rebecca called me often during that time. She'd ask for advice about small things, table arrangements, family gifts, even what colors looked best under candlelight. Sometimes, I could hear the stress in her voice. Other times, I heard something else, gentleness, gratitude, a tone that hadn't been there before. It made me happy to hear her that way. But I also knew that people often show their truest selves under pressure. And a wedding, no matter how beautiful, has a way of testing every relationship around it. The ceremony was to be held at a large estate just outside the city. It was the kind of place that looked like it had been made for photographs, sweeping gardens, marble floors, chandeliers that seemed to hold entire constellations inside them. Rebecca's family had spared no expense. When I arrived, I was met with the sound of laughter and the shimmer of expensive perfumes in the air. I wore the same navy blue dress I'd worn to the engagement dinner. Simple. Elegant. Enough. Daniel met me at the entrance. He looked nervous, adjusting his tie again and again. "Mom," he whispered, "I'm glad you're here." I touched his cheek. Where else would I be? As the guests began to gather, I noticed familiar faces, business partners, social acquaintances, people who always smiled but rarely meant it. Among them was Rebecca's father, moving from table to table, his laughter booming across the garden. When he spotted me, he came over immediately. "Mrs. Walker. I'm so glad you could make it." "I wouldn't miss it for the world," I said kindly. He nodded, his expression soft but careful, as though he wasn't sure what version of me to expect this time, the quiet widow or the woman who had once reminded him of his pride. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Rebecca walked down the aisle in a gown that shimmered like moonlight, her eyes fixed on Daniel with the kind of love that quiets an entire room. For a moment, everything else faded, the tension, the past, the unspoken lessons. All that remained was joy. After the vows were exchanged and the applause faded into music, dinner was served beneath a canopy of twinkling lights. I was seated near Rebecca's parents again. Her mother was radiant, her smile genuine this time. "I'm so happy," she said softly. "You were right about her, Mrs. Walker. She needed to see life through a different lens." "I think we all did." I smiled. Sometimes, the simplest lessons are the hardest to remember. Then, halfway through dinner, something unexpected happened. A man in a dark suit approached the table, whispering something to Rebecca's father. His expression changed immediately, the warmth vanished. He stood abruptly, his voice raised. "That can't be right. There's been a mistake." Rebecca's mother tensed. "What's wrong?" He lowered his voice, but not enough. "One of my investments, the firm in Manchester, they're pulling out. If this leaks tonight, it'll ruin everything." The color drained from her face. "Not tonight," she whispered. "Please." But the damage was already done. A few of the nearby guests had overheard. Whispers spread like wildfire across the tables. The laughter, the music, everything dulled, like someone had turned down the volume of happiness itself. Rebecca, who had been dancing with Daniel, noticed the shift. She hurried over. "Dad? What's going on?" Her father straightened his jacket, forcing a smile. "Nothing for you to worry about, sweetheart. Just business." But it was too late. People were watching. Judging. I saw it then, the same kind of looks they once gave me. The pity. The quiet arrogance. And suddenly, I understood something important. Life has a way of returning every lesson we ignore, just dressed differently the next time around. Rebecca turned to me, her voice trembling. "Mrs. Walker, can you help him? You've dealt with things like this before, haven't you?" I looked at her father. His pride was fighting his panic, his face pale and tight. I stood slowly. "Of course," I said gently. "Let's step outside." We walked away from the music and the murmurs, out into the quiet of the garden. He rubbed his temples, muttering to himself. This can't happen now. Not tonight. Not in front of them. Why not? I asked. He looked up, startled. Because reputation matters, Mrs. Walker. I shook my head softly. No. Integrity matters. Reputation is just what others say about you. Integrity is what stays when the lights go out. He looked down, silent. You told me once, I continued, that your father believed humility is a gift you either grow up with or spend your life trying to buy back. Maybe this is your chance to earn it again, not by money, but by grace. His shoulders slumped slightly. The words seemed to break something in him, the wall of pride he'd carried for so long. Finally, he nodded. You're right. I've been so afraid of losing status that I forgot what truly gives it meaning. We returned to the reception. He took the microphone from the band and cleared his throat. Before we continue, he began, I want to say something. The crowd fell silent. Even the music seemed to hold its breath. He looked toward me for a brief second, then turned back to the guests. Many of you have heard rumors tonight. Some of them are true. I've made mistakes in business, and worse, I've made mistakes in judgment. But tonight isn't about reputation. It's about love, and the people who remind us what truly matters. So if I've learned anything from my future in-laws, he said, glancing at me with a small smile, it's that dignity isn't measured by wealth, but by the grace to stand tall when life humbles you. The room erupted into applause, not loud or showy, but sincere. And in that moment, I saw something remarkable. The same man who once looked down on others was now learning to lift them up. Later that night, as the music returned and laughter filled the air again, Rebecca's mother came to me quietly. Thank you, she whispered. You didn't just teach him a lesson. You gave him back his heart. I smiled. We all lose our way sometimes. The trick is to find it before life forces us to. When the lights dimmed and the last song played, Daniel and Rebecca danced under the stars. He looked at me from across the garden, his eyes shining with gratitude. And for the first time in a long while, I felt peace, not because I'd been proven right, but because love had finally done what pride never could. A few weeks after the wedding, life seemed to fall back into its familiar rhythm. Daniel and Rebecca had moved into a new home on the outskirts of town, a modest, sunlit place surrounded by trees and quiet roads. Every Sunday, they'd visit for tea, bringing laughter and stories that filled the small house with warmth again. One morning, while I was watering the plants near my porch, the mailman arrived. He handed me a small, cream-colored envelope with my name written in a neat, careful script. There was no return address, only a faint scent of ink and old paper. I thought little of it at first, maybe a thank you note from one of the guests at the wedding. But when I sat down and opened it, the handwriting struck me immediately. It was familiar. Sharp. Precise. It belonged to Rebecca's father. The letter began simply. Mrs. Walker. I wanted to write this privately because some words carry more weight on paper than they ever could aloud. I owe you a debt of gratitude, and an apology far deeper than the one I offered in front of the crowd. My hands trembled slightly as I read. He went on. For years, I built my life around control. I believed respect could be demanded, and wealth could buy peace. But that night in your home, the night we sat around your table, you showed me what real dignity looks like. You didn't try to shame us. You taught us quietly, through kindness. Since then, I've been thinking about my own father. He passed before I could ever tell him that I finally understood what he meant by humility. Maybe that's why I felt so drawn to write you this letter. You reminded me of the kind of strength he carried, silent, steady, the kind that doesn't need to be announced. I paused there, swallowing the lump in my throat. It's strange how words from someone you once resented can move you so deeply. The letter continued. After the wedding, the business fell apart faster than I expected. Investors pulled out, and the company dissolved within weeks. For the first time in decades, I woke up without the weight of meetings or expectations. I thought it would destroy me, but instead, I found something I hadn't felt in years: peace. I walk every morning now. I cook breakfast with my wife. We talk. We laugh. And every time I catch myself worrying about the future, I remember your words. Integrity is what stays when the lights go out. Thank you for reminding me of the man I wanted to be. I sat back, holding the letter against my chest for a moment. The room was quiet except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. It was the same kind of stillness that used to feel lonely, but now, it felt full, alive. People often think forgiveness is about letting someone else off the hook. But I've learned it's really about freeing yourself, about choosing peace over pride. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a small wooden box on my shelf, beside my husband's old photograph. He had always said, "You don't need to change the world, May. Just leave a little light wherever you stand." And maybe that's all I had done, left a little light. Weeks turned into months. Rebecca's parents downsized their home and moved closer to their daughter. They visited often, bringing gifts and laughter that felt lighter each time. One Sunday afternoon, as we all sat on the porch drinking tea, Rebecca's father looked around at the blooming garden and said, "You know, Mrs. Walker, I've come to realize that success looks different depending on where you're sitting." I smiled. "And where are you sitting now?" He chuckled softly. "Right where I should have been all along, among good people, grateful for what I have." There was a peace in his eyes that hadn't been there before. The kind that only comes after life humbles you enough to listen. That night, after everyone left, I stood by the window watching the sun dip behind the trees. The sky turned golden, then deep orange, then soft gray. And in that quiet moment, I realized something important. Sometimes, the people who wound us the most aren't villains. They're just lost souls who've forgotten where home really is. The letter had been more than words. It was proof that kindness, quiet, steadfast kindness, could change the course of a person's life. I turned off the lamp and whispered to the empty room, "Thank you." Not to him. Not even to myself. But to life, for the strange, beautiful way it always finds balance in the end. It was early autumn when Rebecca's mother came to visit me alone. The morning was crisp, the kind where sunlight feels warm but the air carries a quiet chill. I had just finished baking bread when I saw her car pull up by the front gate. When she stepped out, she wasn't the polished woman I had first met months ago. Her hair was softer, her face calm, dressed simply in a cardigan and long skirt. She held a small paper bag in her hands. "Good morning, Mrs. Walker," she said, smiling gently. "Please," I replied, "it's May now." Her smile deepened. "Then you must call me Clara." We sat on the porch, the smell of warm bread between us. She looked around quietly, admiring the flowers, the creak of the old swing, the life that lingered in small, ordinary things. After a while, she said softly, "I used to have mornings like this. Peaceful ones. Before everything became performance." I poured her a cup of tea. "You can always start again." She nodded but didn't answer right away. There was something in her eyes as a heaviness, but also relief. "May," she began, her voice almost trembling, "there's something I've wanted to tell you for a long time. Something I never told even my husband." I didn't move, just listened. "I used to work," she said. "Before I met him. Not in an office or anything glamorous, just as a helper, cleaning houses for a few years after my mother passed. That's how I paid for nursing school." My hands froze midair. She looked away, as if ashamed. Back then, I promised myself that if I ever married into comfort, I'd never look back. I tried to erase that part of my life. Pretend it didn't exist. I even stopped using my maiden name because it reminded me of where I came from. I didn't interrupt. Her words came slower now, heavier. "When I first met you," she continued, "you reminded me of that version of myself, hardworking, dignified, but overlooked. And I hated it. Not because of you, May. But because you made me remember what I'd buried." She laughed softly, bitter and gentle at the same time. "I judged you because I couldn't forgive myself. You were everything I used to be, and I was terrified of seeing it again." The silence that followed stretched between us like a bridge. Outside, a few leaves drifted from the trees, golden against the sky. "I'm not proud of who I became," she said finally. "But I want to be proud of who I'm becoming again. You helped me remember that." I reached across the table and touched her hand. "Clara," I said softly, "you don't owe anyone an apology for surviving. We all carry parts of ourselves we wish we could forget. But those parts are what make us kind." Her eyes filled with tears. "You really believe that?" "I know it," I said. "Because if I hadn't been poor, if I hadn't struggled, I'd never have learned to see people for who they really are." She took a shaky breath and nodded. "I thought I was helping Rebecca find her place in the world. But maybe you were the one who helped us both find ours." For a while, we sat in comfortable silence, sipping tea as the sunlight filtered through the trees. Then, she reached into her bag and handed me a small, folded envelope. "This is something I've kept for years," she said. "But it belongs to you now." I hesitated before opening it. Inside was a check, large enough to make my hands tremble again, and a short note that simply read, "For all the times you gave without being asked. For the lessons you never meant to teach, but did anyway. From one woman who's finally learning to be whole again." I looked up, stunned. "Clara, I can't accept this." She smiled. "It's not payment, May. It's gratitude. You taught me something my wealth never could, that peace doesn't come from having more, but from needing less." Her words were steady now. Clear. And in her eyes, I saw something rare, not pity, not pride, but quiet understanding. We talked for hours that day, about youth and choices and the way life humbles you just enough to remind you you're human. By the time she left, the sun was low and golden, and I realized that something had shifted, not just in her, but in me too. That night, I sat by my husband's old photograph again, the letter and check beside it. For the first time, I didn't feel like life had taken anything from me. It had simply given me everything I needed, one lesson, one heart, one chance at a time. The world outside was quiet, except for the wind whispering through the trees. And somewhere in that silence, I heard my husband's voice again, calm, reassuring, timeless. "See, May," he'd say, "you didn't just raise a good son. You helped raise better hearts." I closed my eyes, letting the warmth of that truth settle deep inside me. Because maybe, just maybe, that's what I was meant to do all along, remind people of their own goodness when they'd forgotten it existed. It had been almost a year since Rebecca's wedding. The seasons had turned and returned, spring to summer, summer to autumn again, each leaving behind its own memories. Life had settled into something soft, peaceful, and quietly full. Daniel and Rebecca visited often, bringing food, laughter, and small surprises. Sometimes, they'd stay late into the evening, telling stories under the warm glow of the porch light. It felt like life had finally found its rhythm again. One rainy afternoon, I was sitting by the window, reading an old book when I heard a knock at the door. It wasn't Daniel or Rebecca, they always called first. When I opened it, I was surprised to find a young man standing there, soaked from the rain. He looked no older than 30, his coat worn, his hands trembling slightly as he held out a letter. "Are you Mrs. Walker?" he asked. "Yes," I said cautiously. He nodded. "I was told to bring this to you. From Mr. and Mrs. Harrison." It took me a moment to recognize the name, Rebecca's parents. "Please, come in before you catch cold," I said. He stepped inside, dripping onto the old rug. I handed him a towel and motioned for him to sit. He shook his head. "Thank you, but I can't stay. I'm just the messenger." Before I could ask more, he gave a polite smile, turned, and disappeared back into the rain. I looked down at the envelope in my hands. It was sealed in wax, old-fashioned, the kind people use for letters they want remembered. I sat down at the table and slowly opened it. The handwriting was once again familiar, Clara's. But this time, it was less precise, slightly shaky, as though written by a hand that had weathered both time and reflection. "Dear May, if you are reading this, it means we've gone away for a while, perhaps a long while. Life has its ways of reminding us that nothing, not even redemption, is permanent. After our last visit, we decided to travel, not to escape, but to rediscover. We've been visiting the towns we once hurried through, the people we once overlooked. We've found beauty in small things again, the kind you taught us to see." I smiled faintly as I read, the words painting pictures of their quiet transformation. "We wanted you to know that the lessons you gave us did not fade. We've started a small foundation, nothing grand, nothing loud, dedicated to helping single mothers rebuild their lives. We called it the May Fund. Because it began with you. Every woman we've helped so far reminds me of that day I sat on your porch, drinking tea and rediscovering myself." Tears blurred the ink on the page as I kept reading. "We are healthier in heart than we've ever been. You may never see the people your kindness will touch, but please know, you started something that will live far beyond any of us. You taught us that real wealth isn't what you hold. It's what you give quietly, without ever asking for thanks." I closed my eyes and pressed the letter to my chest. Outside, the rain had softened into a steady drizzle, the kind that feels more like a song than a storm. For a long time, I just sat there, remembering every moment, every lesson, every kindness that had somehow rippled outward into lives I'd never meet. I thought about my husband's words again, "Leave a little light wherever you stand." Maybe this was the light he meant. Not a grand gesture, but the simple act of being human, of choosing compassion over pride, grace over judgment. As the years went on, the foundation grew. Rebecca and Daniel became its caretakers, expanding it into something even larger. Sometimes they'd send me photographs, smiling women, young mothers holding their children, all of them standing in front of small homes built from the fund. Each photo came with a short note, "For every hand you lifted without being asked." And every time I saw those faces, I felt something deeper than pride. It was peace. Not the kind that comes from endings, but from knowing your story has become part of someone else's beginning. One late evening, I sat by the same window where it had all started. The house was quiet again, just the sound of wind brushing against the curtains. I thought about everything, the misunderstandings, the pride, the kindness that healed it all. Life has a strange way of coming full circle. The woman who once pretended to be poor had taught wealth what richness really was. And those who once looked down on her had learned to look within instead. I smiled softly, whispering to no one and everyone, we all live in each other's stories, whether we mean to or not. Then, as the rain began again, gentle, steady, cleansing, I whispered one last line to the night. Thank you, for finding me in theirs. The years drifted by, gently and without announcement. The world around me changed, new houses were built, faces came and went, but my little home remained the same. The same walls that had once echoed with loneliness now carried warmth, laughter, and quiet memories that time could never erase. Every morning, I still brewed tea and watched the sunlight crawl across the porch. I still polished the same wooden table where Rebecca's family had once sat. And sometimes, when the light hit just right, I could almost see them there again, talking, laughing, learning. It was strange how memory could feel so alive, even years later. Daniel and Rebecca visited often. Their visits were never hurried. They'd come with stories of their work, updates about the May Fund, and sometimes, photographs of the women whose lives had been changed. One afternoon, Rebecca showed me a picture of a young mother standing in front of a small bakery. She was living in her car a year ago, Rebecca said, smiling. Now she runs this place and employs 2 other women. She said the fund gave her a second chance. I traced the photo's edge with my finger, feeling a quiet swell of emotion. I didn't give her a second chance, I said softly. You did. Rebecca shook her head. You taught us how. It was moments like that, small, sincere ones, that reminded me why every hardship had been worth it. All those years I thought I was just surviving, maybe I was being prepared to guide others toward something better. Sometimes, I'd get letters from people I'd never met, women from different towns, different lives, all writing to say thank you. Each one started the same way, you don't know me, but your kindness found me. Those words were enough to fill every quiet evening with purpose. As I grew older, my hands grew slower, my steps a little shorter. But my spirit felt lighter than ever before. When you spend your life giving, you realize that the weight you lose isn't a burden, it's pride, bitterness, fear. And in their place grows something softer, grace. One night, Daniel sat with me on the porch after dinner. The stars shimmered above us, scattered like 1,000 tiny promises. He looked out at the sky and said, Mom, did you ever think it would turn out like this? That a simple act of kindness would change so many lives? I smiled. I never thought of it that way. I just did what I hoped someone would have done for me. He nodded. You've always had a way of making complicated things sound simple. That's because they are, I said. We just forget to look at them clearly. He leaned back in his chair, quiet for a long while. Then he said softly, when Rebecca and I talk about you to our children someday, I want them to know you weren't just a mother or grandmother. You were a compass. You showed us where true north really is. I looked at him, my heart swelling with quiet pride. Then make sure they know this too, kindness isn't a weakness. It's a choice, and it's harder than anger will ever be. He reached for my hand, and for a moment, we didn't speak. The crickets outside sang softly. The world felt calm, almost timeless. As the years rolled on, I spent more time writing. Not letters or lessons, just reflections, pages filled with the stories I'd lived, the faces I'd met, the truths I'd learned. I didn't write them for the world. I wrote them for the people who'd come after, so they'd know that life's hardest seasons often bloom into its most beautiful ones. On the first anniversary of the May Fund, Rebecca and Clara visited with a small surprise. They brought a framed photograph, a picture of the very first house the fund had helped rebuild. Below it, in golden letters, was a quote I didn't recognize at first. It read, "Leave a little light wherever you stand." Clara smiled when I noticed it. "It was something your husband once said, wasn't it?" I nodded, my throat tightening. "Yes. He used to say it all the time." "Well," she said softly, "you did. And now it shines everywhere." We hung the photograph on my living room wall, right beside my husband's old picture. The two frames seemed to belong together, one the beginning of a journey, the other its continuation. As time passed, visits became fewer, not from distance but from life's rhythm. People grow, move, change, that's how it's meant to be. But every letter, every photograph, every knock on my door reminded me that stories don't end when the telling does. They ripple outward, touching hearts we may never meet. In my quietest moments, I often thought about Clara's words from that last visit, "You helped me remember who I was." And I realized something, that maybe our truest purpose in this world isn't to become someone new. It's to return to who we were before the world told us who we should be. The days grew slower after that. Evenings filled with the hum of cicadas and the smell of old books and tea. And as I looked around my home, my small, imperfect, beautiful home, I felt nothing but gratitude. Gratitude for the pain that became wisdom. Gratitude for the people who once misunderstood me but learned to see clearly. And gratitude for the quiet truth that had guided me all along. You don't need wealth to leave something behind. You only need love, steady, honest love, that lives on in the hearts you've touched. As the final light of the evening spilled through the window, I whispered one last thought into the golden air. Maybe the richest life of all is one that teaches others how to live gently. And with that, I smiled, knowing my story had already become part of 1,000 others still being written. Sometimes, when the house is quiet and the night feels longer than usual, I sit by the window and listen to the world breathing. The wind brushing through the trees, the faint creak of the porch, the rhythm of a life that has slowed but not stopped. It's in those moments that I think about everything that has happened, and how, somehow, every joy and every pain fit together like pieces of one great story. If I've learned anything, it's that life doesn't test us to break us. It tests us to show us what we're made of, and more importantly, who we can still become. We all start out thinking we have to prove ourselves, that we need to be stronger, richer, louder, braver. But with time, you learn that true strength is quiet. It doesn't shout. It doesn't need to win. It simply endures, patiently, gracefully, with love that doesn't demand anything in return. When I think back to that day, the day I met Rebecca's family, I realize now it wasn't about them learning to see me differently. It was about all of us seeing ourselves more clearly. They needed to remember their humility. And I needed to remember my worth. In that small exchange, something sacred happened, not an argument, not a lesson, but a meeting of hearts. Because when love meets pride, love will always speak last. There was a time when I thought forgiveness meant weakness. That to forgive was to surrender, to let go of your dignity. But I know now that forgiveness isn't surrender, it's strength in its purest form. It's the quiet courage to say, "You hurt me, but I'll still wish you well." And in that wish, you heal a little part of yourself, too. As the years have passed, I've seen people chase everything this world can offer, titles, approval, comfort. And though they gain it, many still carry an emptiness that no amount of wealth can fill. Because peace, I've learned, isn't something you can earn. It's something you build, moment by moment, through honesty, kindness, and the courage to stay gentle in a harsh world. My husband used to tell me that life is like a garden. Not every seed grows when or how you expect. Some bloom quickly. Others take years. But if you tend to it with care, something beautiful will always find its way to the light. That's how people are too. Sometimes, the seeds we plant in them don't show right away. But one day, without even realizing it, they blossom and the world becomes just a little kinder because of it. When I look at the photographs on my wall, the smiling faces, the homes rebuilt, the families renewed, I don't see proof of my success. I see proof that love travels farther than we can imagine. It moves through generations, carried in words, in memories, in small acts of grace. There's an old saying, we live twice, once when we're alive and once when someone remembers us. I think about that often. And I hope that when I'm remembered, it's not for what I owned or accomplished, but for how I made people feel. That when someone says my name, they remember warmth, patience, and the simple truth that we are all doing our best with the hearts we've been given. Sometimes, life doesn't give you what you want, but it always gives you what you need. It gives you people who challenge you, moments that humble you, and opportunities to love when it would be easier to walk away. Those are the moments that define who we are. If you ever find yourself standing in the middle of a storm, wondering why the world seems cruel or unfair, remember this. The storm isn't there to destroy you. It's there to clear the way for something better. And when the clouds part and the sunlight finds you again, you'll see that you were never really alone. Life was working with you all along. I used to think my story was small, a quiet life, a modest home, ordinary days. But maybe that's the secret most people miss. It's the small stories, the quiet ones, that keep the world gentle. The ones that whisper instead of shout. Because even the smallest act of love can echo louder than a lifetime of pride. So if anyone ever asks me what I've learned, I'd tell them this. Be kind, even when it costs you something. Be honest, even when no one's watching. And never mistake silence for weakness. Sometimes, it's just wisdom choosing not to waste its breath. And if you ever meet someone who reminds you of your younger self, someone lost, proud, or afraid, don't judge them. See them. Because once, someone saw you too, and it changed everything. The world doesn't need more perfect people. It needs more patient hearts. More gentle souls who can love without condition. And maybe that's what I was always meant to be. Not a teacher, not a lesson, just a reminder. That goodness doesn't vanish. It just waits to be remembered. So wherever you go, whoever you meet, whatever you face, leave a little light behind. Because you never know who might be walking in the dark, just waiting for someone like you to guide them home.